Good evening, Bedford. This is the Candidates Corner. My name is Bill Foote. I'm your host tonight. I'm here to introduce you to Dan Hynes, the New Hampshire State Senate candidate for District 9. Good evening, Dan. How are you?
Thanks, Bill. I'm doing great. Thank you so much for hosting me.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure. We got to get you elected.
Absolutely.
Anyway, thanks for asking me to do this. This is my first time on this side of the camera, so it's going to be kind of uncomfortable for me, but that's what growth is all about. Anyway, tell us about you and why you're running.
Yeah, so I'm super excited to be running. So this last term, I was a state representative, really loved my job up there. So this term, an opportunity arose to rise for state senate as Andy Sanborn didn't run again, so it's an open seat. And I really liked how Andy voted. I pretty much voted with him over 90% of the time. So I've been telling people, if you like how Andy voted, you're going to like how I vote. But that's how I decided to run for Senate. And the reason I got into politics is, so growing up, I always knew I wanted to make a difference. And so I went to law school, and I want to protect people's constitutional rights. And as a criminal defense lawyer, that's essentially what my job is defending the Constitution. It's up to the state to prove someone guilt. And if they do that, then the appropriate consequences follow. But I want to ensure that the state is doing things as they should. And as my time doing that over the last 10 years, I've seen a lot of different areas, particularly criminal justice related, that I think we can make some improvements on. So while I represent someone, I can help that individual person, but I think it's better to set some policies and really help everyone.
Wow. Okay. So you want to specialize in criminal justice, but do you have any other interests in the Senate that you would be willing to focus at?
Absolutely. So criminal justice reform is one of my priorities. At the top of the list, though, is the economy and taxes. So I think over the last 2 years, we have done so many good things in New Hampshire. We need to keep that on track. So this last term, we reduced business taxes. And those taxes on small businesses, it's really an income tax on those businesses.
Sure
so
is.
New Hampshire likes to say, hey, we don't have a business, or we don't have an income tax. That's sort of true depending on who you are. In certain circumstances, we do have an income tax. And I've fully supported lowering those taxes. I think it's great. It led to actually an increase in revenue. So the Democrats pretty much universally, including my opponent, opposed those tax cuts, calling them tax cuts on huge corporations, which are employing people, but it is a tax cut on small businesses as well. And as a result of those tax cuts, like I said, our economy has never been better. We actually put in the bill that if the growth was a certain amount, then the second step of those tax cuts that came into effect, and we reached that. So, I think it's pretty telling that we reduced the tax cuts and we actually increased revenue. So one might argue or expect, hey, if you're going to reduce the tax coming into the state, there's going to be less money. That's not true, just because businesses were so overtaxed. Now that we give them those cuts, they're able to expand their businesses, they're able to hire more people, they're able to pay employees more. It's just been all around a win for businesses and our economy. It's astounding to me that the Democrats want to reverse that.
Well, it's just a Laffer curve in practice. I mean, at some point, there's going to be a point where revenues are going to drop, but not so far. And
at some point, we reach that number, I'll reevaluate, but we haven't reached it yet. I'm happy to continue reducing those business tax cuts until we reduce that number. And
maybe it's in the weeds, but what's the next step? I know it dropped from 8 to 7.9. It's going to drop to...
I might have in front of me, I know we're finally less than Massachusetts, so that is great. I was telling people years ago, I was like, our business taxes are higher than Massachusetts. People found that pretty amazing because they're known as one of the tax states. People come here specifically for lower taxes, and it was unfortunate at the time that Mass was lower than us, but we finally got below them.
That's not much of a thing to hang your hat on, though.
It's not, but I mean, we're making progress. It's all part of the goal. I think Trump's agenda has done well for the economy. Sununu, our legislative agenda with the Republican majority in the House and Senate, it's just been amazing results this last year. So we've had record low unemployment. We've increased, we've had all sorts of extra money that we just didn't anticipate. And so our budget this year, we had a lot of good things done from it. So we increased our funding for the opioid crisis by more than 50%. That was great. We increased community college funding by more than 10%. We had money for all-day kindergarten, and we increased funding for developmental disabilities, and we ultimately eliminated the wait list. Those are all great things.
Sure.
I voted for all those things. And my opponent saying she would have voted against the business tax cuts like pretty much 99% of the Democrats, they would have voted against those things. So I think that's pretty telling on what the difference between me and my opponent is.
It makes you wonder what their goal is. Instead of doing what's best for the state, it's doing what they think is best for themselves.
It is, yeah, and I mean, my opponent will say she wants to help everyone, but I mean, to me, look at what we've done to our economy. Our economy is helping everyone. I don't know anyone. Ask yourself, are you better off now than you were 2 years ago? I expect just about everyone is going to say yes.
That's right. That's right. Okay. Okay. Let's talk about what your time in the House. You said you were supporting. You gave out a list of those things.
Yes. So in this House last year, I was on House Judiciary, and I was super excited to be that. That was my first choice, so I was glad to be on House Judiciary. When I asked the Speaker and told him that was my first choice, he jokingly told me we can't have too many lawyers on that committee, which I agree with. But as it turned out, I was actually the only practicing lawyer on the committee. So I had 20 people. I was the only practicing lawyer. There were a couple other people highly respected, one non-practicing lawyer, so retired, and the other Democrat who I really liked, Paul Birch, got along with well. He was a lawyer in Vermont, I believe not practicing in New Hampshire, but we did a lot of great things on Criminal Justice Committee. So I supported pro-life legislation. We addressed bills for veterans. We deal with right-to-know requests, which people don't know what that are. It's essentially the state version of Freedom of Information Act. So when you want information from your government, they have to give it to you unless it's one of a few different exceptions. So it's really government accountability. I think everyone should stand for that. And then the fourth issue of topics we broadly touched on are right to privacy. So there's a lot of bills we addressed on that, and we actually passed a constitutional amendment in the House and Senate, so it's going to be on the ballot this time. It's question number 2 on the ballot. It basically says a right to privacy in your medical records and your personal information. So I would ask people, please vote yes on both the constitutional amendments. That one's number 2.
Huh. I hadn't heard about the constitutional amendment passing.
Yeah, so it got through the House and the Senate by the required margins, and it does need, I believe, 2/3 to actually take effect, which it's a high number, but hopefully we can get there. The other constitutional amendment's a good one. It's basically a right to standing. So what happened was, for many years, if you were a taxpayer and you were injured, you could sue the government for essentially violating a law, rule, or your constitutional right. And a few years ago, the Supreme Court said, nah, we don't want people suing for that. So the legislature passed a law saying, well, we don't like that decision. And the Supreme Court said, nah, that's unconstitutional. So the only way to fix that is a constitutional amendment. And so that's on the ballot, and that passed by huge, huge numbers. So essentially 90% of the House passed it, 90% of the Senate voted for it, completely bipartisan bill. Wow. ACLU's on board, Grand State taxpayers, pretty much everyone I can think of is in support of that bill. And it does really come down to accountability. So I urge people, please vote for both constitutional amendments on the upcoming ballot.
I'll make a point of studying them.
Great.
It's one of the things you don't really hear about.
You don't hear much about it. So a lot of states, there's numerous ads running for them, and unfortunately,
we don't do that in New Hampshire.
We don't do that in New Hampshire. So
right.
I know Grand State taxpayer has a handout that they've been giving people, and when I go to people's doors, it's one of the ones I'm handing out. So the information's out there. Please learn more about it.
High-tech solutions for
high-tech solutions.
Okay, so when you win the election and go to the Senate, what are your goals?
Yes, so taxes are still one of the high priorities. So I know I would like to see further business tax cuts. Another one is interest and dividends tax. I would like to see that cut because that especially hurts older people. And throughout the state, really, we have incredibly high property taxes. Bedford, in my opinion, fortunately, is one of the better towns. One of the reasons people, including myself, moved to Bedford is great schools and relatively low property tax. But unfortunately, especially the rest of the Senate district, it's just not the case. So I have a lot of different solutions to addressing that problem. So one is the state could essentially stop charging the statewide property tax from the town. Now, I'm not suggesting we eliminate that and not fund schools. I'm suggesting the state pay for that portion of it. So obviously that money would come from somewhere, but that's one of my solutions. Another thing is I fully support school choice. I would support the money following the child. I think everyone can agree not every child learns the same, and I hope people can agree we want the best education possible for that child. So, I mean, if the child's learning best in public school, great, they're going to stay in a public school. If a child learns better in a smaller environment, maybe being homeschooled or a charter school, private school, whatever it is, I think the child should be given that opportunity. I support essentially children, not buildings. So that's one of the things I would like to see address those taxes as well.
Well, the education establishment is fairly entrenched in supporting public schools at the expense of everything around them. So it's a
and a lot of people, especially they look at it that is sort of a net gain. It's not a net gain. The public schools can continue to strive while we also allow children to strive elsewhere. So just because we're taking money, or if money doesn't go to a school, that doesn't mean the school is going to be worse. In fact,
no, I agree. I mean, as a member of the school board, 2 years ago, the superintendent told us that we lost a kid to a charter school, and that the money had to, the state funding had to go with the kid, and he said, you know, this is a bad thing, and I said, no, it isn't. In a $72 million budget, we can't support a $7,000 swing one way or another. I mean, we make more on tuitions anyway, so it's a question of you know, putting our interest ahead of the kid. I struggle with that.
Yeah, and this last year, the school choice bill, so it would have gave roughly $5,000 per child, and we know that the schools, on average, spend around $15,000 a child. So the way I see it is, if that child moves out of the school, that should be a $10,000 gain to the school.
District,
I think
it's a $10,000 cash flow swing.
It is a cash flow swing. I think people generally agree that smaller classroom sizes are generally a good thing. So. I think it's a good thing. Unfortunately, it failed by a few votes this year. Certainly something I would support in the legislature next year.
Yeah.
Other good progress we made on education this year, I mentioned the increased funding to community colleges, was the all-day kindergarten. So I did support that. People say I didn't, but you can look at the vote. I supported the version that the governor signed.
Well, if you have to ask me, I struggle with full-day kindergarten because for me it's 3 more hours of school that includes lunch, nap, and lunch and nap, and that's kind of a tough thing. And for us, it would be an explosive growth of cost. I mean, you're looking at a kindergarten that would cost $5,000 less than $1,500 that the state kicks in. So a kindergartner costs us $3,500. If you do a full day kindergarten, it's like a first grader, and those run about $13,000. So even if we did get the Keno money and it dropped it another $1,500, we'd still be paying $10,000 more a kid. So you talk about, you know, charter schools picking up a kid and getting $5,000 worth of state money. The taxpayer would be picking up that $10,000. So if we pick up another 100 kids for full day kindergarten in Bedford, 100 kids times $10,000, you know, you're looking at $1 million right there. So it's a big cost impact.
Yeah, and ultimately the bill that we passed allowed it to go to the towns for a vote. So I think that is great. I support local control and towns deciding what's best, because what works or doesn't work in Bedford may or may not work in Peterborough.
Yeah, you know, I think the general claim that full day kindergarten is where you want to be. Gee, I don't know. I don't know. For the cost impact, I would say it's definitely a no. But there's a lot of interest here in town anyway.
Yeah. And so in regards to criminal justice, one of the legislation that I would like to put in this year is dealing with victims' rights. So this last term, there's a constitutional amendment. It was known as Marcy's Law. Yeah. So if people aren't familiar with it, it would have amended our Constitution to give rights to victims. Now that in itself, that sounds great. The bill was as far from great as possible. It would have deprived people of the accused of their constitutional rights. So while it passed the Senate, the House overwhelmingly in a bipartisan fashion defeated that. The ACLU opposed it. And there were good things in the bill. And I told people in there, as a criminal defense lawyer, there's a lot of things in this bill that criminal defense lawyers can get behind. I don't know anyone who opposes giving notice to victims. I don't know anyone who opposes allowing victims to speak. There were good things in the bill. One of the things I thought was the worst thing in the constitutional amendment is essentially giving immunity to the government if they're not following it. And one of the worst things I thought that happened in the committee was the Attorney General came in and testified, and he said essentially our Victims' Bill of Rights is unenforceable. And my thought is, yes, it's unenforceable because right now you're giving immunity to police, the government. Don't do that. So I promise people, and I will do it, I will put it in a bill amending our Victims' Bill of Rights. So we have one now. It gives different rights for victims. We've amended it over the years, and one of the major differences was the Victims' Bill of Rights only applies to misdemeanors, or only applies to felonies.
Right.
The Marcy's Law would apply to everything. I'm fine with expanding it to misdemeanors. I don't see a problem with that. So there's a lot of good things that can be done, and I will put in a bill to amend and strengthen our Victims' Bill of Rights.
So Marcy's Law would not try and come back in that form. It would be...
Well, they may try to bring it back, but I'm hoping we solve all of the issues first so that they see no reason to do so. And yeah, there's been a lot of fallout from it for various people, but we can do a lot of what it wants, just not the way they wanted to do it.
Right. Right.
And one of the other issues that's important to me are pets. So if people see my orange signs around there, you might see my dog. That's Davy Crockett. He's my campaign mascot, and he's an Australian cattle dog, 4 years old. Rescued him a few years ago from Nashua Animal Shelter. And I put in a bill last year dealing with animal cruelty. It would have increased the penalties if the animal died. That bill didn't go anywhere, unfortunately, but certainly animal cruelty is one of the issues that I fully support and would like to see something done with. Because, I mean, we hear pretty much horror stories every once in a while.
The Great Dane story up.
Yeah, the Great Dane story up. Yeah, and unfortunately, I didn't wind up voting for that bill because it had some due process concerns for me. So a lot of people with that. But again, there were good things in that bill. I think that's a great opportunity for people to come together. And pretty much no one's against animal cruelty. So, I mean, that's something we just need to get it tailored to do the correct thing. One of the things I learned in committee is there's what's called unintended consequences. So you might not want something bad to come up in a bill, and I was reading a different, I can't think of anything specific, but a lot of bills we are presented ahead of time. People come in and testify, and the great thing about people testifying is you get to hear from people, and it's things I didn't consider, and get to ask them questions. And we've even had a fair amount of things where the bill's sponsor said, I hadn't thought about that. And eventually there's a process where we can put in amendments for bills. So it's a great process. If you never come up and testify in front of the legislature, I invite you, please come up if you can. If not, email.
No, I have. I went up to testify for Senate Bill 446, the energy bill to raise the renewable cap from a megawatt to 5 megawatts.
Yes.
And I went up there to support it, and I watched a parade of senators and then representatives support the bill that had transmogrified into just raising that cap into what turned out to be a jobs bill for the North Country. So it was one of those things where it was eye-opening and a real turn-off, because what you go up there expecting to find and then see something that's completely different. I guess the congressman or the representative that supported it in the House took his name off the bill because it changed so much.
Yeah, that does happen. So I put in bills that had amendments, and at the end they're sometimes not even close to resembling.
It's not recognizable. Yeah,
it's not. So it is unfortunate when that happens. And one of the other areas of criminal justice reform is the opioid crisis. So I think we can all agree that that's a problem. This last term, like I said, we increased our funding for it by pretty much more than 50%. That was in the budget. The Democrats opposed. And besides, I like to focus on prevention when we can, so I think it's good that we do that. But another thing I'm particularly familiar with are what's called drug courts. So drug courts is if you're charged with a drug charge, you can, instead of being in the normal court, it's drug courts. And unfortunately in our state, they're fairly limited, so they only take certain types of cases. So I would like to see them expanded throughout the state and allow different people to go into the court, because the drug court, it really focuses on rehabilitation and getting people the help they need. So
versus what, putting them in jail?
Yeah, that's been... I'm very outspoken. The war on drugs has been a failure.
Yeah.
We just cannot incarcerate people for years. They often come out. I mean, it just happens all the time. They come out. They didn't accomplish anything. They're just going to go back to the ways. We need to get to the underlying problem and get people the help that they need. So one of the things in the drug courts is it's just not throwing someone away. It is staying on top of that person, monitoring them. They really get like mentors, and it's a great process. Everyone who I've known who's been familiar with the drug courts has everything great to say. Judges, prosecutors, defense lawyers. It's a great thing. We need to expand it.
So the state is not funding that adequately, or
it's not that it just hasn't been. just the way it's set up through the court system right now, is sort of they're in charge of it, and they could expand it, but we could also expand it through the legislature. So I don't think it's an adequacy funding, because, I mean, at the end of the day, I think it actually costs less. I'll have to get figures on that, but it's my understanding to incarcerate someone is $40,000 a year. I can't imagine monitoring someone is anywhere near that amount.
Yeah, right. No, I know the firehouses in Manchester had the program where they would rescue people, and apparently that was not funded. I think they're trying to do it voluntarily now. Help me here.
In regards to that, my opponent likes to focus on downshifting. So I tell people, in our Constitution, 28A, it's actually unconstitutional to require a town or city to do something and then not fund it. So these things, if we're requiring the state, county, town, whatever, to do something, it has to be funded. So we actually didn't, the argument from the opponent is we downshifted all this stuff and now our property taxes are risen or went up. That actually happened under the Democrat governor. Under the Governor Sununu, we're actually, I'll use the phrase, upshifting. So we have sent a lot of money back to the towns this year for property relief. So there was tens of $millions that went for bridges and construction.
School security.
School security was another huge one. Right. So Bedford certainly made out, and as you're driving around, you see all the construction. You can thank the Republicans for that. Hopefully you like the construction. But yeah, we put money aside for the red listed bridges, and the things that the Democrats wanted to accomplish, we accomplished all these things without raising a single tax.
Right. Yeah, I kind of grumbled about that at the very end. You got the $100 million of money that the Trump tax cuts spun off to the state, and you guys spent it immediately. So I tried to get a hold of my representative and say, what are you doing? Stop. And the money was gone before you could do anything with it. So it's...
There was a lot of different things that we spent money on, and one of the things we did was increase the rainy day fund from $10 million to over $100 million. I wasn't necessarily super supportive of that, but it was in the budget. I would like to see us rather invest the money. Now, at some point, $10 million, if something happens, we would like to have more of a cushion so we don't have to raise taxes like happened in the past under Democrat control. But $100 million I think is more than sufficient. So next time I'd like to see us invest in things that are going to give us a good return on investment. I think education is a great area to investment, and we really want to do things to keep people in the state. So a lot of people say, well, what can we do to keep people in the state? One of the things I would like to see, I'm not sure that any state's tried it before, but I'll try running it by some people, is instead of giving the tuition tax breaks while you go to UNH or a state school, is give it afterwards. So if you stay in the state, just start reducing the money at that point. So I think that's an incentive to get people to stay in the state.
Right, come and stay, yeah. No, I know the retirement system in New Hampshire is nowhere near fully funded, and that's not going to change just because the interest rate return on them is so low that with that expanding, the curve is going the wrong way. So that's something that really needs to be gotten after. For me, the things that would bring people to the state are lower business taxes to encourage business to come, and also lower energy costs. And right now, energy is
absolutely, energy costs are.
And I think it's driven by state laws, so it's.
I would like to see things be done about that. So this last year, we eliminated the energy consumption tax. So that's a great step in the right direction. And one of the issues is different energy sources. So obviously, everyone wants lower energy. We would like lower energy more energy sources. The issue is it, or at least for me, one of the concerns when we do these projects is it safe? And are you going to have to steal people's land to do that? So if it's unsafe or you're stealing people's land, I'm probably going to be opposed to that alternative energy source. But one of the things I liked is the idea of building essentially the pipes along the highways that we already have. That way we're not using eminent domain, we're not stealing anyone's property. It's already there. It needs to be done in a safe manner, obviously, but that's something I'd like to see done, and somewhat similar to energy. So this last year, I think the environment, obviously important. So you're just talking about Merrimack, and people before the show were talking about PFOAs, and I'm very familiar with that issue. I co-sponsored a couple bills by Mindy Mesmer dealing with that issue. So, I mean, I can't think of anyone who's in favor of pollution. It's certainly harming everyone. So it's what can we do to essentially help. So we did get some bills put through. We got some bills passed, and I think we're certainly making progress in that area.
Yeah, I think it's the expense of cleaning up. It's not the fact that people don't like the pollution. It's just
Right.
the aftermath that you're stuck
Absolutely.
trying to correct afterwards. Okay, so we're down to the last 3 minutes. Do you want to try and make a pitch to Bedford to vote for you for your
I can do that.
Senate position?
So, Bill, thank you again so much for having me. I am so excited to be running for state senate. I want to thank everyone who came out for vote and voted for me. I'm looking to be your proven tax fighter in Concord. So I have a record. You can actually look at how I voted this last term. The record's online. So while the Democratic Party and others put out mailers being nicely misdescribing my record, you can look at it. I voted for all-day kindergarten. I have promoted education. I supported increasing funding for community colleges. I supported increasing funding for the opioid crisis. I supported increasing funding for infrastructure. I did all this through the Republican great leadership with Governor Sununu and a Republican majority in the House and Senate. We did all that without raising a single tax. And that's what you can count on if you vote for me and other Republicans, is we're going to keep our economy great, we're going to keep our taxes low, and we're going to keep New Hampshire moving in the right direction. One of the quotes from my opponent that I find that I would agree with is, she feels even more vehemently that we have to stop what the legislature is doing. Otherwise, we're going to end up like a third world country. If you think that over the last 2 years we're now living in a third world country, go ahead and vote for my opponent. If you think that we're better off today than you are 2 years ago, I ask you, vote for me, vote for the Republican team, Sununu, all the way, go straight down the ballot. We're going to keep things great. We're going to keep us moving in the right direction, and we're going to do it by decreasing taxes and helping make Bedford a better place to live, New Hampshire a better place to live, and our country better. New Hampshire is a great place to live, work, raise a family. I want to keep it that way. I want to keep the government out of my wallet and out of my bedroom. And if you can support those things, I ask, please come out and vote for me on November 6th. You can learn more at hynesfornh.com. Or if you want to give me a call, happy to answer any questions, discuss further with you. My number is 603-583-4442. And if you like a yard sign, I have my orange ones or my pretty ones with Davy Crockett on it. I'm more than happy to give you one of those as well.
Well, thank you very much, Dan. It's been a pleasure. This is my first time on this side of the camera, so to say I'm a little nervous is an understatement. But I think you've done a great job, and I look forward to voting you and for the Republican team up and down the slate. So, good luck on November 6th. Tuesday voting is at Bedford High School from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. and I hope you turn out and vote, because this is an important election. Thank you, Bedford.